Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Seattle, the fourth oldest and one of the largest Rotary clubs in the world. You know, our members have been meeting every Wednesday since 1909, dedicated to the idea of improving ourselves and our community through service. It's so great to have all of you here. We've got a pretty decent program today. I'm guessing that's why a few more people are here today. Steve Ballmer is here, and he will be up here in conversation with GeekWire's Todd Bishop in just a little bit. It's going to be a fascinating conversation, so I'm glad that you're here for that. If you're new today, we start our programs with a little inspiration and a little music, so let's begin with that. Our invocation today is led by George Twist. George, come on up, and our song by Todd Sommerfeld.
Today, let's pause for prayerful inspiration about gender equality. Some of my thoughts. Me Too calls for an end to exploitation of women in creating workplaces and domestic settings free from aggression, sexual harassment, and violence. Recently, we've come all the way from Harvey Weinstein scandal to Oprah Winfrey as potential presidential candidate. And if you missed it, Iceland has become the first country in the world to make it illegal to pay men more than women for doing the same job. In the United States, women earn 81 cents for every dollar earned by men. By the way, it's 84 cents in the the EU. Now, I liked the thought that Bono shared in an article for Time. He wrote, quote, "I was aware and I was glad that I was being offered up as a fire starter for a debate the magazine rightly wanted to have about the role of men in the fight for gender equality. It seemed obvious to me that the sex who created the problem might have some responsibility for undoing it." Now, we in Rotary may have been a bit ahead of the curve in this area. Let's pray that society will continue efforts to catch up and surpass. Amen.
I was trying to figure out how to introduce Steve Ballmer, and thankfully Hamilton McCullough, our VP of Programs, helped me out. One of the things I love about Steve Ballmer, he's done a lot of things in his life, but every time I see Steve Ballmer on the internet, I see this infectious enthusiasm that makes me say, man, I wish I had that. It's like a human energy drink in human form. It's amazing. Steve Ballmer is one of the most enthusiastic people that you will ever meet. Have you seen him speak at the annual Microsoft meetings or seen him chest bump the mascot at a Clippers game? It's the same guy. Steve was employee number 30 at Microsoft, helping to grow the small startup to a company today that employs more than 110,000 people. During his tenure, Microsoft grew to almost $80 billion in revenue and was the third most profitable company in the United States. As Steve was considering his future after 34 years at Microsoft, he was really looking for a way to apply his enthusiasm to his family's philanthropy and activism. The Ballmer Group is focused on increasing economic mobility for children and families in the U.S. But he thought it would first make sense to figure out what the government is doing with all of the money it raises. So we put together a team of economists and researchers and founded USA Facts, which is a data-driven portrait of the American population, our government finances, and government's impact on society. So where does the money come from? Where does it go? Whom does it serve? And most importantly, what are the outcomes? Here to ask Steve Ballmer those questions and more is the co-founder of GeekWire, Todd Bishop. Please give Todd and Steve a warm welcome.
So I've been a longtime technology journalist in the Seattle region, and I'm very fortunate to have interviewed Steve a number of times. And Steve Ballmer is, as you know, one of only 3 CEOs in the history of Microsoft, and it's been really remarkable to see what he's done in his post-Microsoft career. And we're going to be getting into all of that today. So may I, with that, introduce former Microsoft CEO, Steve Ballmer, and we'll bring him up to the stage now. Oh, it's great to have you here, Steve. You know, you're known for dramatic entrances, and I think I was one of the more dramatic ones. It's great to have you here.
And I thought I had just-in-time delivery.
Exactly, exactly. One of the best business principles. So, Steve, your retirement has been anything but. You're the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. You head
Go
up
Clips!
Golden State tonight, right?
We do. We have Golden State tonight. We're playing with about 4 injured players, but our young guys are battlers.
You're the head of the Ballmer Group Philanthropies with your wife Connie, the head of USA Facts, which is a fascinating initiative that we're going to be talking about here today. One of your colleagues called this not your retirement, but your portfolio life, I understand. Catch us up. What's life for Steve Ballmer like in 2018?
Yeah, one thing I'll say is a huge difference, certainly than being CEO of Microsoft, is you I more or less, control my time. Running Microsoft, you could say I could select from focusing on Project A or Project B, but there's always an interrupt, there's always a customer who needs something done, there's always a crisis in some business. The ability to get all the way back and control your time is quite low, I would say. In retirement, I do get to decide retirement. In my portfolio life, one of the nice things about having 4 or 5 unrelated things you work on, people always assume you're working in one of the other areas, even when you're out screwing around playing golf, which I consider a major part of my portfolio is kind of sports and recreation. But you know, I spend time on the Clippers. I actually keep careful track of that for time, for tax purposes. That takes me over 700 hours a year, but that includes working by going to games. It's a fun way to work, I'll tell you that. I do spend quite a bit of time on our philanthropy. We're focused very much on ways to provide better opportunities at the American dream for kids who are born into the toughest circumstances. And then this USA Facts project, we started, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I was telling my wife there was not much to do philanthropically in our area of interest except pay our taxes, because the government does take care of the sick, the poor, the elderly. And, she kind of said, that's wrong, dude. And I don't know about other spousal situations in the room, but sometimes when my spouse says, then I have to go look things up and understand them. And truth is, it was very hard to get the numbers. And so I decided we needed something like a 10K for government in the U.S. And then it turned out when everything was said and done, both my wife and I were right. The government does put up most of the money, but the money doesn't get well tuned without the involvement of various, not just not-for-profit institutions, but also government institutions that are involved in direct service. For example, King County Mental Health here.
So you, as you say, are a numbers guy.
Yes, I am.
You really are, and that's how you ran Microsoft and informed your decisions there, and as you say, it's informing your philanthropy now and your understanding of the U.S. government. Last April, as you said, you launched USA Facts on tax day. What have you learned in the time since about our country, about our society, our culture? What are your key takeaways from this project?
Well, I'd say I've learned a ton. We launched on tax day on the theory that says everybody in the United States is 2 things. Number 1, we're all shareholders in the United States of America. There's 330 million shares, and we each hold 1 of them. If you back out children, you may need to do that. You can decide because they don't vote. And we're all taxpayers and recipients. So we're also, every one of us in some way is a customer. And you can look at that from very big, broad things. How much influence does government action actually have on the economy? So we put together some data that people can take a look at. Now, this person looks at a bunch of lines that go like this, and then a bunch of government actions that go like this, and I might say, slow, steady, upward progress must not depend too much on government action. But our job with our USA Facts stuff is to put the data out there and let people make their own judgments. Because economists are blah, 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 blah. We did this analysis. And blah. We don't believe in all that. It's kind of like a business, the way we look at it. You look at a bunch of points on the line, and if you're going to predict what's going to happen in your business next, It's probably to continue out the direction of the line. And so we put together information like that. That'd be one big observation. I know we're coming into a discussion in Congress. The president will lead on whether we need a big new dose of money into infrastructure, bridges, roads, et cetera. Everybody has their own complaints with traffic. Everybody has their own complaints with the roads. And yet, if you look at the government data, because that's all we look at, roads have improved consistently over the last 37 years. Bridge quality has improved consistently. Commute times and delay times have been relatively flat. And a guy like me might say, things seem to be incrementally improving. The amount of money spent has not exploded. And so it's curious to me why all of a sudden we want to explode the amount of money we spend on infrastructure. It's not a bad thing, but in the context of everything we can spend taxpayer money on, is it necessarily the one you prioritize? It's an interesting thing to me. But I could take criminal justice. What's the average length of time that a prisoner stays in prison who's committed a violent crime, and just exclude people who actually stay, not get a life sentence, but actually stay for life? What would you guess? And violent crime is murder, manslaughter, rape, armed robbery. Anybody want to take a guess? 48 months. 48 months. So while people talk about decriminalizing some drug offenses, which may be a smart thing to do, I look at that number and say, maybe my instinct says incarceration times for some people ought to be up, even while we don't incarcerate others, because those things do strike me as worthy of quite some time in prison. So just a few. I could go on and on and on, and
You've
maybe
learned a
we'll
lot.
get to some others.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are reports, unconfirmed, that some of our national leaders, who I guess will remain nameless for the purposes of this question, have a short attention span. So if you could show President Trump, Mitch McConnell, and Paul Ryan one data point, one slide, what would it be?
Well, I happen to have one right here. So what we're trying to do here is to say, what are a child's chance of moving up economically if they are born to parents in the bottom 20% of all incomes? So if you're born and your parents are in the bottom 20%, what is the probability that you move up someplace, not to the top, but someplace? The perfect number, of course, would be 80%, right? Because it should be fair for you get 20% shot at each quintile. 66% of whites move up. That includes white Hispanics in addition to, because white is a race and Hispanic is an ethnicity. The number is only 49% for African Americans. So these are, I look at these numbers and say, the number for whites, not very good, but not terrible. The number for blacks is really not very good. The thing this doesn't show is there are also pockets of whites for whom these numbers are terrible. It's just there's no way to break out the government data to see that. And certainly you can take a look at that in not just rural areas, but many other places. You get poor white populations, you get poor Native American populations. It's just race is broken out as a separate thing in the government database. But it gives us a chance to move the point, President Trump, Speaker Ryan, and Leader McConnell. Now, if you're born in the bottom 40%, what's your chance of moving up? Well, if you're white, it's only 45%, and it should be 60. And if you're African American, it's only 33, and it should be 60. So to me, you take a look at this, and you give me one shot, one slide, one thing to say. I say this just isn't okay. Not everybody gets to move up, but everybody should have a shot of moving up, a probability. And you can't say to me that, hey, there's a reason not to move up. You just can't say that. You also have to say if nobody moves up, that must take hope. You can't believe there's an American dream if everybody in your neighborhood is, essentially not moving up the economic ladder. I think that's not okay. I think that's something that our leadership needs to focus in on and understand. So you give me one slide. We tried to keep it as simple as we could. Want to make sure we're very targeted for our audience. And this is not a partisanship issue. I'd say that to a Democratic leadership, a Republican leadership. I'd say it to absolutely anybody. And the solutions are not just going to come from government. They have to come from communities that decide that they want to focus in on this issue. They'll come from money that the government largely provides, so the government money cannot go away. But the solutions to this will depend on government money, community focus, and the role of capitalism. It's the thing that probably makes me a little bit different than a lot of people who focus on this problem. I think capitalism has to play a role. Capitalism has to create new jobs. Capitalism has to create new approaches to education. Capitalism has to drive down cost of goods so that less affluent people have better and cheaper access to goods. So I think it takes sort of the big prongs of America: democracy, community, and capitalism if we're really going to make any progress on this issue.
A huge issue that was in progress when you launched USA Facts and has since come to fruition is tax reform. When you look at the numbers there, what are your key takeaways?
I happen to have a slide on that too. Just this is a busier slide. I'm not sure I'd show this to anybody in government, but it's not the most complicated slide either. Tax reform. What the blue boxes, first of all, this shows you how much people make. If you are in the top 1%, you make the blue bar, but I want you to notice that big hash mark that says it is not drawn to scale. So top 1% would be maybe 2 screens further down, but for purposes of clarity, we chose to show it this way. So there's a lot of money in blue. The amount of taxes paid total is the red bar. And you could see that top 1%, next 20%, and so on down the line. If you look in the red bubbles, you can see the percentage of all taxes paid. 26% by the top 1%, 72% by the top 20%. You may not be able to read this. How much money does it take to be a member of the top 20% of households, not individuals, household earning in the United States? Can anybody see it or guess? $113,000. If household income is $113,000, you are in the top 20%, your household is, of earners in America. It takes, I'll see if I can read the number without glasses, to be in the next 20%, it takes 80, I can't read from here, $67,000. People do not make as much money as many affluent people think. If you make $120,000, you probably don't, your family does, you probably don't even realize that you're already in the top 20% of earners. So when people come to talk about taxes, the bulk of taxes are paid by high earners. There should be no surprise. Tax rate. The top 1% all in pays 20, and this is all in. This is sales tax, it's all federal taxes, sorry. It's payroll taxes in addition to income tax. 27% effective rate on the top 1%, 24% on down. Now people could say whether this is fair or unfair. Everybody can have their own opinion, but there's no question, if you want to have any tax revenue, you got to get it out of the most affluent people. You just have to. If you are in the second 20%, so not very affluent, you're making not very much money, your income tax will be on average $787 a year. And I think it's fair. I think it's very fair. But when you talk about a tax cut, you're really talking about maybe a $200 tax cut being a huge tax cut. So people say tax cuts, they're certainly not for the second quintile. You might pay a little bit more, probably more like $2,000 if you're in the third quintile. So you're probably now talking about a huge tax cut being $400. Partly what I'm trying to show is tax cuts really can only benefit the top 2 quintiles. That is the top 40% of people. And again, you can have an opinion that says it's good or bad to cut or increase taxes, but really understanding who's paying what, where the leverage is in the system, so that policy is made by looking at real numbers and not adjectives. Adjectives are partisan. Numbers, nonpartisan. You know, is 20% a big number for tax rate? I don't know. I won't use the word big. I'll say it's 20. And it compares to 24, 27, 12, 5, and 2. And then you apply whatever adjective you want. I did better in math courses than I did in English courses anyway. And so it's just an easier description. I think grounding in real numbers, whether it's the tax debate or anything else, is a very good idea. Long-winded, but not a simple topic.
Something that's a little bit more clear-cut. Your Clippers had a great win against the Atlanta Hawks on Monday. They play tonight against Golden State. What have you learned about leadership as an NBA owner? Is there anything that you've learned over the past few years in Los Angeles that you wish you knew as Microsoft CEO?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Business is, but claims to be the most accountable thing in the world. Because people will compare to the social service sector or the government sector. It's a lot harder to measure outcomes and be accountable. Business puffs up its chest and says, oh, we're so accountable. Now, I know from my experience, what we'd say is, well, we missed this quarter, but we're going to get it next. We missed this generation of a product, but we'll get it next time. We had a bug, but we'll get it. I don't think Microsoft's the only company in the world that thinks that way. And it's good, it's persistent, it's tenacious. But you want accountability? Win, lose, game over, no chance to make it up. Next, win, lose, game over. Businesses talk about teamwork and how their teamwork is and measuring the teamwork. Hell, in this new business, every 24 seconds, teamwork. You either scored the basket or not. You either stopped somebody else from scoring the basket or not. There's no question how good your teamwork was. It's right there. Another form of accountability. People love to talk in business how you get the accountability of being judged and scrutinized by your customers and by the press. Anybody in the press, any fan knows everything I know about the Clippers' performance. There's not one thing that a fan doesn't know that I know. I might know a little bit more about the human personalities, and that helps with a little insight. But if you want accountability, heck, our fans send me detailed recommendations of what to do. They've studied our salary caps. They know more than the agents out there in some instances. Accountability, focus, transparency. There's nothing quite like sports.
I had the pleasure of interviewing you at our Sports Tech Summit, at the GeekWire Sports Tech Summit a couple of years ago, and I asked you what the key performance indicator was that you looked at most in sports, and you answered wins. And I realized at the time I should have challenged you. The most important KPI in sports is not wins. It's
championships.
That's right.
That's actually a lesson I've learned. The way you might optimize to win championships is different than the way you might optimize to have a good team every year. They're not identical strategies, and you have to think through the difference. The place you'd see that most if you're a basketball fan right now is the Philadelphia 76ers. They've been terrible for about 6 years. Terrible. I mean, terrible. And now they have a young core because they were so terrible that isn't going to win a championship this year, but has the kind of talent that might set them up. I'm not sure emotionally I could quite go through that, but maybe a form of that at some point for every team. Boston did the same thing. They traded their 2 best players about 8-9 years ago and got back draft picks, and they've turned that into a highly competitive potential championship team.
We're here speaking with an audience of business and community leaders in Seattle, and you've made it clear from the beginning that you are not moving the Clips to Seattle. When it comes time for expansion, though, you will be in a unique position to make the case for Seattle to the rest of the league. What will be your pitch?
We have these beautiful trees. It's a wonderful place to live. The weather's always good, if you like a little rain. But seriously, the things that will be important. Can the team economically be a good place to have a basketball team? And the answer is yes, for two reasons. Number one, Seattle did a very good job of supporting a basketball team for a long time. And number two, Seattle's gotten much more affluent since the time the Sonics left and moved to Oklahoma City. There is no shortage of potential business support, fan support, high ticket prices. There's a franchise in Memphis, and it's a great thing to have a franchise in Memphis. It's probably the poorest city where the NBA has a franchise. But a season ticket per game on the floor might cost $250 in Memphis and might cost $3,000 a game in LA, just to give you a contrast. Seattle would be more towards LA, I'm sure, than it would be towards Memphis. So there's a lot of things that would make Seattle a great place. Having a great arena will be fundamental, and an arena that is accessible. One of the great queries I have, I don't know, but one of the great queries I have is, with all the traffic around Amazon headquarters, how much more tricky would it be to get to Key Arena now than it was when I had season tickets to the Sonics, for 20 years? And I hope the answer is somebody's got it figured out, because otherwise that is an issue. And so I'm looking to potentially build an arena, new arena for the Clippers in LA. And one of the things in LA that is fundamental, or in California that's fundamental to environmental approval, is traffic. It is the most important environmental. So it's not the owls and the da-da-da and the da-da-da. The big thing is traffic. It is the hardest environmental issue around. And I hope everybody's got it figured out. It's not traffic I'll undertake, since I'll be in LA for a lot of games, but I really hope that one's figured out, because I would say an accessible arena, high-quality accessible arena, an affluent environment, and a good place to live. And Seattle is the most affluent city in America without a basketball team. There's no question. This would be the best place to put, if there's expansion, to put a new basketball team in the United States.
How long will it be? How long until the NBA returns?
I have no clue. I mean, it's part of the reason why I was happy to buy a team in LA. I went to see the commissioner right after I retired, and he said, look, we've learned our lesson. We don't want teams to move. So if you want to buy a team, don't expect to be able to buy it and move it to Seattle.
I love the timing of that. After it moved from Seattle to Oklahoma City, they decided that they were no longer going to have teams move. Isn't that great?
It's two things. One, it's unfortunate for Seattle, obviously, but two, it should be a call to Seattle civic leaders that we blew it. We blew it. If people want to have a basketball team, we blew it. I was working full-time at Microsoft, and I figured somebody would step up, but I feel like I was part of blowing it. I feel like the city and county and state were part of blowing it in terms of the arena. I thought existing ownership was part of blowing it in terms of what it did. I think the rest of citizens putting pressure on all parties to get the team to stay. It's not, you have to say our community didn't do what it needed to do. And you can see it, because now that we don't have a team, our community looks like it might step up. But it is just not that easy. Teams don't sell very often. Expansion, I've never heard discussed in the NBA, frankly. So I can't predict. When I bought the Clippers, I was 58 years old. And if it was wait 13, 14, 15 years, whatever, to have a team in Seattle, it didn't fit with my life plan. I wanted to get to getting. Although a team in LA, if you move it to Seattle, I have to say it'll lose probably about half its value. So please don't look at me to take the haircut, even for our beloved city.
We want to open it up to questions for Steve. I have one more question for him, so raise your hand while I'm asking this, and we'll get to you during the Q&A. I want to pull from another part of your retirement portfolio here, as it were. As part of the Ballmer Foundation, you've spent a lot of time in cities around the country: Cincinnati, Detroit, your hometown, LA, Minnesota. What have you learned? How have those experiences shaped your view of the world and your approach to philanthropy?
Well, as I said, the only thing we focus in on is opportunity for kids here in the United States. There are a lot of other things that are meritorious. They're just not interesting to my wife and I. With that said, we'll still support some community things in Seattle and our alma maters, but that's not the bulk of our focus. I'd say the big things I've learned is, number one, nobody's got a magic answer. If it was just, oh, something's been discovered, it just needs scaling, that'd be a wonderful thing, but it's not. When people say the answer will come from one major action, let's just get our schools to be better, not. I mean, that's one of the biggest things people have to realize. The reason why a lot of poor kids don't have academic success has absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the teachers. We want the best teachers, but if you're growing up hungry, you're not going to do as well in school. I have a friend who started a not-for-profit to help kids get fit for eyeglasses. Something like 50 or 60% of the kids who struggle in school can't see the blackboard, whiteboard, whatever color the boards are these days. Hopefully they look more like whiteboards than blackboards, but gosh, some of these schools use relatively low tech. If kids have a lot of violence in their neighborhoods, we visited a school in Watts, and it was an elementary school. They had these nice kind of little rolling mounds. And I thought, oh, that's fun. They've made it look good for the kids. No, those mounds were there so kids could get down if there were gunshots in the neighborhood, just to be safe, if you will. Safety, housing. If you're living out of a car or you're moving, why do poorer kids tend to be in 3, 4, 5 schools? Answer, because housing is not stable. Whether it's Section 8 vouchers that go away or moving between different family members. So you can look at all these things and they all contribute to the kid not having the opportunity they might want. There's a body of research on something called adverse childhood experiences, which I'm no expert in, but there's 9 of them. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional and physical neglect, domestic violence, alcoholism in the family, family member incarcerated. There's a 9th, I'm not thinking about it, but your probability of having an addiction or behavioral issue rises exponentially with the number of these that you experience. And there's no doubt then we're going to see more of these issues with kids whose parents are struggling because the environments just aren't as good. There's no magic. And even if you could address all of these things, you may or may not, all you're going to do is increase probabilities. But the only way to get there is to get the community rallied to get there, to have the communities take up shared goals. And I literally mean the community. You need people from business. You need people from universities, community colleges, the K through 12 school system, from the faith organizations, from the not-for-profits, the philanthropists. And I'm sure I forgot somebody. And you got to kind of lock them together and say, what are the goals? What are the goals? How do we measure our community and what it's willing to do to step up? And then how do you use a Six Sigma process to say what's not working? Why is this not working? Let's get back to root cause. Let's figure out how as a community to rally around this problem and make some progress. It's not going to be solved with a few government programs. Government programs deliver money. They don't deliver solutions. And we can't expect them. And through service organizations like Rotary and others, people just have to step up.
Question over here.
Hey, Steve. I wanted to go back to your first slide, because both these slides were real eye-openers, both of them. But just to clarify on that first one about the number of chances for white versus black young people to grow. And to clarify, that was not the percentage of ones that actually do move up. That's the percentage of chances they have, correct?
66% of white kids will move up from parents who are in the where their parents were in the bottom 20% of income. That number is, as you saw, 49, I think, for black kids.
So that's not the percentage of chances. That's the percentage of kids that will actually move up.
Well, that is the percentage chance. This is one where you have to say the probability of moving up is the number of kids who moved up. Your probability is no better than the next kids.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next one.
I just got to underscore this. If you live in a neighborhood where nobody moves up, do you still think you have a dream? You have hope? You don't. I mean, where do you get the hope if nobody actually moves up? We're sponsoring some research that goes on at Harvard with a professor I've come to know to try to ask the question, what differentiates kids who do move up from kids who don't move up? Was it that they got touched by an after-school program? What are the distinguishing characteristics? Because it tells you more about how to help the kid if you can figure out what you might want to role model for kids who do emerge, if you will.
Over here.
Hi, Steve. John Adams with Seattle 4, and thanks for being here, and thanks for your work and your wife's work for children. A lot has happened in the last couple of months regarding children with the last Tax Act. We saw CHIP defunded, 9 million kids don't have health insurance. We have DACA that's in a suspense area right now with the Dreamers, and I'm wondering, what's your analysis? How does this affect children and their ability to move up in our society?
Yeah, unless I missed it, CHIP hasn't been defunded. It may be defunded. That is the thing on the table. I'm either an optimist or a cynic. I think it's just a big old fat negotiating chip that will never actually get kicked in. That's just, so I'm not in panic, as many people I work with in this area are in panic. DACA, I'm not sure what will happen with DACA. I'm just not sure. And I think it would be unfortunate, very, 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 very unfortunate. It still doesn't change the probability for kids who do live here. And so I think the DACA thing's important, but it's not front and center in terms of our focus. Not because it's not terribly important, it's just not front and center relative to the kinds of things we're up to. The truth is, I think some government programs might benefit by being defunded, and others might benefit by getting more funding. I think part of the problem is everything's a sacred cow. One of the things I learned at Microsoft is sometimes you just had to be willing to prune programs when you learned that something works better than something else. We can't act like the supply of money to fund things is inexhaustible. It is exhaustible. And some things don't have the value that other things do. One of my big surprises is, what is Medicaid? I thought Medicaid fixed broken arms, basically. Then I find places where Medicaid dollars are being used to give parenting classes. Other places, they're using it for literacy programs. Because if you want to keep people out of the healthcare system, you actually want them to have good, functional lives. And I thought that's a great thing. I think it's a great thing that it's not all about broken arms. It's about lives that we hope don't get broken.
Right here.
Well, Steve, thank you for being here. My question has to do with apathy and community. We have a challenged city council in Seattle. I looked at some numbers, and in 2015, when we elected 9 city council people and the highest property tax referendum ever, we had less than 30% of the people turn out to vote. I'm the president of our community council. Getting people to come to a meeting is really challenging. 2 questions. What about apathy, and what about getting people involved to make things change?
I don't know how one works on the problem of apathy. I really don't. I don't. I will say, as it relates to government, there are many people who don't feel government in their daily lives. Whether it's there or not, they just don't feel it. I mean, they might, when they get older, they might get a Social Security check. But if you're a relatively upscale American, you probably feel the tax authority and really not much else. And so it's hard, and when I say affluent, I'm not talking about rich people. I'm talking about people who would make $60,000 a year and more. because you're not involved in any of the things that are toughest. You're not getting spot checked and arrested. Those things aren't happening to you. So how to stimulate less apathy? It's a good question. Voting, everybody should at least hope the people they agree with get out and vote. I think it'd be great to have the people you don't agree with also get out and vote. But the current strategy for most people is let's at least get the people who agree with me to vote. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Somebody's got to take the lead on driving that.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you to you and Connie for your leadership and philanthropy. I'm going to go back to the comments you made about the systemic way we need to address these disparity and opportunity to advance. Have you and your foundation leadership, and especially you as a legendary champion, have you been able to move the ball in creating these new systems in communities? Where does it look like now on that trajectory line you mentioned?
Yeah, it turns out that people who can give away money don't throw lightning bolts either. In fact, philanthropic dollars just aren't, in the grand scheme of things, large enough to make a difference at all. It doesn't mean there's not a role for philanthropy. Philanthropy can help fund things that government's not willing to try yet. It's kind of the venture capital, if you will. There are things government doesn't fund. And I think of it, you know, if you think of it in a construction sense, it's like puttying in all the holes government can't fund or doesn't fund. That's a good role for philanthropy to play. Philanthropy can help in partnership with government to stimulate good government action. We're financing a study that King County's doing, how to get better outcomes for the money that they spend on mental health issues. We're not doing anything. We put up some money so the county can really decide how to best do its work. So the notion that somebody sits back in their ivory tower and can throw a lightning bolt that solves something, that's not right. We do want to partner with communities that do want to come together, which means we really want to help support them. There's an effort here in South King County called the Roadmap Project that focuses on these issues in the right way. Graduate Tacoma, down in Tacoma, Commit Dallas, I visited, Memphis, Seeding Success. There's a number of these things that are really great, and we hope to help the communities that want to help themselves.
Thank you, Steve. I'm really fascinated with the way that you focused in on where you wanted to give your giving, and I'm excited to hear the research out of Harvard. My question is that research going to build on Duckworth's research around grit? Is this bringing it earlier in life, or is it going a different way? And how did you focus in on your choice?
I'll say the research doesn't build on anything. What we're trying to do is just statistically take a group of kids who have done better than their parents and a group of kids who didn't, and that, well, they're not kids anymore, they're young people. I think most of them in our cohort will be over 27, 28, and then just statistically, kind of the stuff I love, statistically say what differentiates the two groups, and then the question is, what do you learn from that? So it's more of a numerical exploration than it is, you know, we're not trying to build a theory right now. We're trying to collect the data. How did we choose our focus? I think both my wife and I think it's just not fair. I mean, it's just not fair for kids not to have a chance. And, you know, we're not art people, so we don't build art museums. There seem to be a lot of people willing to give money to hospitals. They're the people from Children's. Yes, I know it always takes more money, but there's a lot of people who seem willing to do that. You know, scientific research, I think, is pretty fundamental, but not to this issue. And there's plenty of people willing to throw money at cancer research. We support our alma maters, but the truth is, for economic mobility, I don't think scholarships at four-year schools are the answer. They're a good thing to do. At my alma mater, I think Harvard, I think if your parents make under $100,000 a year, you go for free. But the issue isn't just the scholarship money, it's all the kids who have never a chance to go to four-year schools, and they too deserve an opportunity to move up.
I've been to enough Rotary meetings to know that this is the group that pioneered the hard stop. So one last quick question right here.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to make a comment about our Rotary-style AAU basketball program. We're celebrating 20 years this year, so you know a lot about it. So.
Well, I have to say, I both love and hate the Rotary Boys and Girls Club basketball program. As a parent of a son who did not play for Rotary and sometimes got their kicked by Rotary, that's in the sense I have a problem, in the sense of a program that I think is great at helping my lens is young men, really stay on a good track in life. I think it's a phenomenal thing. Who's the most important, or most famous, I should say, person associated with the Rotary Club of Seattle this week? It's a kid from Rotary Boys and Girls Club who made a 50-foot shot in a game who is at Stanford University. He made a shot from half court to beat USC on ESPN's Play of the Week. Was a kid from the Seattle Boys and Girls Club Rotary program. I think it's cool as heck.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Steve Ballmer.
Thank you.
Steve, Todd, thank you so much. The envelope I just gave you, Steve, is a donation that we've made in your name to Rotary First Harvest, 300 healthy servings of produce for families in need. Thank you so much. Made on your behalf. Thank you. Next week, Me Too. Two small words with enormous meaning. The Me Too movement was an important storyline in 2017, and as was evident with the Golden Globes the other night, it is just getting started. King 5's Natalie Brand is going to moderate a panel of 3 women next week who understand this issue all too well. Mona Lealock, former First Lady, former journalist, went public about sexual harassment in the workplace in 2016. She has since become a powerful voice in that movement. Carrie Tupper is also on the panel, was one of the predecessors of the movement when her sexual assault case against former Senator Brock Adams went public 30 years ago. She's now a PhD and somewhat of an expert on the topic. She will be on the panel. And also Wendy Gillahan. She is a local human resources specialist. She is the victim of a sexual assault. She's going to be able to give you expert advice about what your organization is doing or not doing to deal with sexual harassment in the workplace. And I'm also going to ask members of our club, men and women, if you've been a victim of sexual harassment. Next week, I'm going to ask if you want to stand. It's something that we want to visualize. As Steve was saying about the things that he and his wife were working on, the Me Too movement, it's hard to believe that this is even still an issue. It's not going to get solved until all of us take action and all of us raise our awareness and become enlightened on the topic. So next week, Me Too, we're going to be back in this room. Thank you so much for everybody, especially the guests who showed up today, and we are adjourned. Have a good rest of your week.